We're going to start out tonight with a quote, and anyone who knows me is probably not surprised we're going to start with a quote, because I start a lot of things in my life with a really good quote. And this one is especially fun for me to start with because it's from Yogi Berra, who was brilliant as a baseball star, and I think, in my opinion, even more brilliant as someone who stood back and observed and made observations about things that we saw in life that make us pause and often grin and then go, Those 8 words that Yogi Berra said make me pause and think and go, quite often. The future ain't what it used to be. The phenomenon that Yogi Berra describes in those 8 words, one of which isn't even grammatically correct, I'll note, the future that we look into sometimes, often we find ourselves looking forward with almost a sense of disappointment for something that we haven't even experienced yet. Because we see conditions how they are today, and we wonder, how can the future ever be anything we really want and desire? And so we feel a little bit bummed out preemptively for something that we don't even know is ahead of us. So this idea from Yogi Berra also gets me thinking about another concept that I find really important in my work as an educator, but also as an evaluator. I'm constantly challenged by my organization and my colleagues to evaluate the work that I do as an educator and look at impacts of what I'm doing. And one of the concepts from evaluation that I have found especially appealing and has really stuck in my mind is that whenever we evaluate anything, in something in our work life, our personal life, whenever we evaluate something, we are engaged in the act of reflecting forward. So think about that for a second. Reflecting is usually something that we reserve for looking into the past, looking behind us. But the idea of reflecting forward is basically what evaluating is. It's reflecting on something that's happened in the past, but really concurrently looking ahead at the same time. So we're taking what's gone on in the past and we're looking backward and forward as we look into the future. So with Yogi Berra's idea about the future, and maybe what it is or ain't, and this idea of reflecting forward to make sense of the future by looking into the past, I want us together right now to take a look at something that we can all probably picture in our minds that has happened in the past. Maybe you weren't at one personally, but I want you to think about a barn raising. I'm going to bet that every one of us in our mind, if we dig into our mind's eye, can find a photo or an image in our mind of what a barn raising looks like. Maybe from an elementary school textbook from years gone by, a black and white photo. Maybe you've watched a documentary on the History Channel of a barn raising from the Amish communities. Wherever it comes from, just for a moment, humor me for a second. You don't have to close your eyes or anything like that, but just think about an image of a barn raising and all of the different components that you might be seeing in your mind's eye. So I don't know what your image looks like. Mine looks like a scaffolding, almost a skeleton of wood coming up from the ground, almost something being created where nothing was before. This behemoth structure, maybe 3 or 4 more stories high. There's people moving around, there's activity and action as this thing comes up from the ground right before our very eyes. We maybe can't see the motion going on, but we can sense it. There's this cascading sense of people and tools and bodies and activity going on as this barn is getting raised. We maybe can't hear the noises of this barn raising, but if we could, we would probably hear the sound of hammers making contact with nails, maybe a foreman calling out, heave ho, as the walls are being raised. We could probably hear the sound of wood being sawed and all of the human energy and noise that would be going on. We can't, maybe in our still image in our mind, smell what a barn raising smelled like, but I would like to think, based on my Midwestern roots, that if we could smell it, it would smell like fried chicken and mashed potatoes and some other hearty meal that was being prepared for the workers that were putting their time and energy into this barn raising. So we might not be able to see the motion, we might not be able to hear or smell what was going on, but we have in our mind what a barn raising looked like and what it really was. This is one of the images of a barn raising that I find really fun and really interesting, and the one I want us to focus on tonight. Maybe this is kind of like the one that you were just picturing in your mind. This one is from the Wisconsin Historical Society. They've let me use this for this talk. And it's of a barn raising on the Wisconsin plains in 1906. And as I look at this image of a barn raising and I stand back and really take in what this barn raising looks like, it has a lot of lessons to teach me, and maybe you as well. There's three really big things that stand out to me as we capture this image of a barn raising, and as we think about how we use it to reflect forward and think about what our future might be. I think we have some things to take from this barn raising into that future. So one of the first things that I observe when I look at this barn raising is knowing that someone on this image had to have the realization that sometimes we all need a hand, even though we would rather die than ask for help. Because someone in this image, we don't know who it is, but someone in this image came to a point, at some point in his or her life, where he stood or she stood with a goal that needed to be accomplished, and that stark realization, maybe that sinking feeling that we can all relate to when we realize we can't do it alone. We can't do it under our own power. We don't have the skill, the time, the money, the resource, the knowledge, the connections, whatever it is, we have to ask for help. And we're faced with that choice of we would rather die than ask, but would we rather fail than ask for help? And that's a pivotal point that many of us can relate to, that someone in this image we can also relate to, that we have to reach out and ask for help, even though it stinks sometimes. But we have to put it into the context of would we rather do that really uncomfortable thing and reach out and ask for someone to help, or would we rather fail at the goal that we have ahead of us? So that's the first lesson I think of when I look at this barn raising image. The second lesson that comes really clearly to me is that whenever you're raising a barn, it's going to be a spectacle. And if there's a spectacle, spectators and even some naysayers and critics are going to come out of the woodwork. They're going to abound because there's always people that when there's activity happening, if there's something going on the plains or on the landscape in our community somehow, when it's a spectacle, people are going to spectate. That's what they do. So as you look at this image, as I did, I kind of got a little grin on my face because there are certainly people who are pictured on this photo of this barn raising who are there to work. They've got their overalls on, they've maybe set down their hammer just moments before this photo was snapped, and we can just see as soon as the photo's done and they're done posing, they're going to pick up their hammer and they're going to get back to work. And there are some people in this photo who really aren't there to work, it doesn't look like. They're dressed a little too nice for some of the action of a barn raising. Maybe those are our spectators, maybe those are our naysayers, I'm not sure. But when we think about spectators and naysayers in the work that we do in our communities, when we're doing the barn raisings of our own, we're always going to have people spectating and maybe even criticizing a little bit. So when we think about those spectators, often we get frustrated. Why won't they just pick up our hammer and help already? But what the spectators are doing are watching. They're spectating. And maybe as they're watching, they're also watching and learning. Maybe they're watching and getting inspired. Maybe those spectators have a barn that they need to raise somewhere in their future. And by being there, watching our barn raising, they're getting the knowledge and maybe the inspiration to go out and build a barn of their own someday. So those spectators maybe are getting a gift from us that we can hopefully generously give them. Now those naysayers, what gift are they getting or giving? Well, I like to think on my good days that on a barn raising or any sort of work that we're doing in our communities, naysayers are actually giving us a gift. Because the people who stand back and watch and challenge us and tell us why we're maybe doing something wrong and how they would have done it differently are giving us the gift of forcing us to articulate what it is we're up to in the first place. When someone comes to us with a challenge, maybe they wonder about our intentions or really if we're doing it the right way, and it sure isn't how I would have done it, we then are compelled into a position where we have to articulate clearly and passionately to them why we're doing what we're doing, why we're building our barn in the first place. So those spectators and those naysayers are part of any good barn raising, and they can really be an opportunity for us to learn, to maybe get a little bit more convicted in what we're doing, and also maybe give that inspiration and knowledge that they need as well. So the third lesson, as I look at this barn raising image, is probably the most important lesson for me to think about and to learn. And the third lesson that I see from this barn raising is that in a barn raising, like a lot of good stuff that happens in our communities, we might be sharing all of the success together, but we might not all be sharing the benefit. So look at this image again and wonder for a second with me, who's the person that owns this barn? Who's the person who's going to have the opportunity to use this barn in the springtime when it's rainy for a dry place to put his hay? Which guy on here, one person, is going to benefit from having a warm, safe place when the raging winter blows across the Wisconsin plains to put his livestock so they stay safe and maybe alive? See, there's about 68 people pictured in this image. And at the end of the day, when this barn is done, 67 of them are going to go home. They're probably going to wipe the sweat from their brow. They're going to stand back in awe of this barn that they just built together. They're going to pat themselves and each other on the back. And then they're going to go home. And one person is going to benefit from the barn that they put up. Now, this is the basic, fundamental, elementary rule of reciprocity, right? We've read it in sociology textbooks. We read it in the Bible. Do unto others, the golden rule. That's all what this is about, is the rule of reciprocity. Our friend Yogi Berra had a thought on reciprocity. His was a little bit more humorous, but his thought on reciprocity, you may have heard before, is that Yogi was going to go to every one of the funerals of any of the friends that died, so that when he was gone, they would come to his funeral. A little bit different view of reciprocity, but the same fundamental principle applies, is that when we're doing work in our communities, we can stand back and share in the success of a lot of things that we can do as a community. But not all of us are going to benefit. Maybe not right now. Maybe someday, one of the other 67 guys is going to need some help. And then he's going to benefit as well from the success of this group effort. So those are three lessons that I think of when I soak in that image, when I think about a good old-fashioned barn raising. And what's most exciting are not these three lessons necessarily, or the sights and the smells and the sounds and the historical aspect of a barn raising. What's most exciting to me is that this is not just a black and white image relegated to our past. We have barn raisings going on everywhere around us that we can get pretty darn excited about. So Yogi Berra takes us into that perspective with his words. It's like deja vu all over again. We don't have to keep barn raisings in a black and white image in our history textbooks as a thing in the past. When we reflect forward and we think about barn raisings of long ago, we are surrounded by them in our community today. If you're fortunate enough, like I am, to live in a community that has a volunteer fire department where people give of their time and talent for my benefit, they've raised a barn. When we live in a community that brings people together to put food in a backpack to send home with kids who might otherwise go hungry over the weekend, they've raised a barn. When I get to take my mountain bike out and ride on trails that other people have put their time and energy and sweat into building for me, that is a barn raising. If you've had the opportunity to sit at your computer and donate to a crowdfunding campaign, where you are able to contribute money, little or a lot, to help propel forward the dream of an artist or a musician or an inventor or an entrepreneur through your money going to fund their goals, you have been part of a barn raising. We're part of a barn raising right here tonight because there's a group of people who put their time and energy and a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of organizing effort into building a barn for Cody right now through having our first ever TEDx event. We have barn, yeah, I would agree. So the barn that we sit in right now followed those same principles of the barns from long ago. Sure, there are spectators that came around and went, it's never gonna work. Not here, we've never done that before. All of those same principles of shared success and the opportunity to create something out of nothing through the cooperative effort of our whole community. That's a beautiful thing that we're all enjoying. One of the reasons I get so excited about the barn raisings of long ago and of today is that not only are these barn raisings building barns, not only do we have the programs and services and trail systems and events like this that we can benefit from, but the bigger, significantly more important benefit of these barn raisings is that every time we work together as a community to raise a barn, we're not just raising that barn. We are figuring out how to do community. And it's not easy, but we're figuring out how to communicate. We're figuring out how to solve problems together. We're figuring out maybe how to take criticism and readjust our plans and include more people in a better outcome. See, those are skills that I think we need desperately today in our community, in our state, in our nation, in our world. I'm not a person prone to pessimism. I usually don't get worried about a lot of stuff. But when I do get worried, it is about the state of affairs and how we communicate and work together and come together or fail to do those things as community sometimes. We stand at a place in our times right now, locally and globally, where there are issues that threaten to weary us at best, divide us, and make us cynical at worst, because we have lost a lot of the opportunities to communicate and share ideas and share resources and get better together. So when we look to those lessons of the barn raisings from long ago and of this very day, and the ones that are going to continue happening, not only do we get the benefit of having a barn, but we also get the benefit of learning how to do this stuff together. That's the really big benefit that I get really excited about. So we think about this idea of reflecting forward, looking backwards and forwards at the same time. We think about the idea that we'll end where we started. The future ain't what it used to be. I think Yogi was right on. It sure ain't. The future ain't what it used to be, because I don't think he could have ever anticipated the incredible power of the barn building nature here locally, and that we can have more and more of across the globe. So as we leave tonight, as we think about the inspiration and what the future looks like from so many perspectives of our TED speakers here tonight, and also as we look back and think about the barn raisings of long ago, we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of skills to build, but we, I think, can continue building barns together and building the future that even Yogi would be pretty proud to be part of. Thank you.